One analogy that my stake president and very close friend gave me when I was in the beginning, he says, I want you to imagine that you have this beautiful 1,000-piece puzzle on your table that was prescribed to you, and it gave you meaning and purpose in your life, and how you perceived things and your paradigms and everything. And that's what the church gave to you. And then through no fault of your own, your puzzle has been shoved onto the floor, and there's nothing left on the table, and there it is in 1,000 pieces on the floor. He said, what you're going to do now is you're going to lean down and you're going to pick up one piece at a time, and you're going to sit with it, and you're going to look at it, and you're going to decide whether you're going to put it back on the table.
All right. Hello, everybody. With me today is Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller is someone who I have interacted with quite a bit online. A lot of disagreements, but also I think some areas of agreement as well. Anthony is a financial planner up in Montana. What part of Montana are you from or living in right now, Anthony?
So we moved to Billings, Montana in 1996, so just over 24 years ago. I grew up in Mesa, Arizona in the Phoenix area.
Okay.
And then did college in Utah with 2 years away for a mission.
Awesome.
And then we moved here 24 years ago.
Cool. Well, our topic today, we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of belief systems generally, religion, and kind of deeper than, sort of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and really focusing more on more fundamental issues related to, basically, I think are common to almost anyone who's a human being. And I think, though, it would be useful as kind of an introduction to you. I think your story is an interesting one. It's one that I think a lot of Latter-day Saints can identify with. And in this first little bit, I want to kind of hear a little bit about your story, your kind of belief journey in kind of a first 5 or 10 minutes here.
Yeah, so my ancestors are all Mennonite, which is a conservative Anabaptist group. They're conscientious objectors. They do missions and things like that, humanitarian types of things.
Don't they often get confused with Amish?
So Amish, Hutterites, and Mennonites are all trace their ancestry basically back to the early Anabaptist movement from the 1500s in Switzerland and Germany.
Okay.
They felt like that for someone to be baptized, they needed to basically be close to an adult, because they needed to realize what they were getting themselves into. And so they were severely punished. So it's similar to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a tradition with regard to the sacrifices that were made by the pioneers. Mennonites, Amish, and Hutterites all trace their ancestry and history back to the stories of the kind of persecution that they received in Western Europe when they were part of the early Anabaptist movement.
Very cool.
So in any event, so my parents, I was born in Goshen, Indiana, near Elkhart, in Indiana, where all the RVs are made, or not too far from South Bend, where our new Supreme Court justice nominee went to law school. And my parents joined the church when I was 3, and I'm the oldest now of 4 children. So effectively, it's as if I grew up in the church. When my parents joined the church, it was probably about 1969, 1970. So if you think of the culture of the church, particularly in the Phoenix area, Arizona area during that period of time, that was the time when Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon doctrine was a big deal. It was probably in just about every home. Cleon Skousen was a really big deal, very conservative type of thing. There, with Ezra Taft Benson's kind of rhetoric is probably the right word, but the kind of messages that he would portray, the John Bircher type of ideas were pretty prevalent in the church in the Phoenix area when I was growing up. Joining the church as a child around 1970, so I was in the church when the race ban existed. In Mesa, Arizona, growing up, about a third of the population were church members. So our ward was very similar to maybe growing up in a Utah ward. We had release time seminary and so forth. So the church worked really well for us. My ancestors are pastors, entrepreneurs, and educators. And my father's choice was to take the entrepreneurial route, and it didn't always work very well. And so there was a lot of time growing up that the church really was important to us and would help us out when we, didn't have the resources that we needed. And then eventually my parents would divorce. My father was excommunicated, and my parents divorced when I was around 14 years old. And so then there was a period of time from when I was 14 to almost 18 where I would deliver pizza and mow lawns, and my mother would do sewing and alterations out of the home to try to make ends meet. And the church took care of us. We had really great home teachers. I had great scout leaders. It was not infrequent that we needed help from the fast offering program and so forth. But we lived with a tremendous amount of faith. We had stories of faith, not only of our ancestors, but in our family. One story that my mother has shared, I think she might have got it published in the Ensign, was when my sister was a baby and I was an infant. We didn't have a lot of money, and my mother did some sewing and alterations in the home. And we were out of milk. We didn't have diapers for my sister. And there wasn't very much gas in the car, and we were out of toilet paper. And somebody came over and had her hem a pair of pants or something like that. And she collected, I don't know, a couple dollars, maybe $2.50. So what she did with faith is she held out 10% for tithing, and she took it over to the bishop in a tithing envelope and went back home. And lo and behold, one of our neighbors was going out of town, and they had milk. And they didn't want to throw it away, so they gave us milk. And then later that day, somebody came over and they said, we have these diapers our kids have outgrown, so we have these disposable diapers. We'd like to give these to you. And then that night, apparently moved by the Spirit, some teenagers TP'd our house. So we had toilet paper, and with what she had left over.
Now I don't have to feel guilty when I went and TP'd people as a kid.
Right. Right. Maybe they needed the toilet paper.
Maybe I was on the Lord's errand.
Right. But those kinds of stories were really prevalent in our family. Tremendous faith, very literalist, fundamentalist type of faith and belief. Even as a teenager, my parents would send me to like Cleon Skousen workshops where he'd talk about the Constitution, but he'd have a very literalistic, fundamentalist interpretation of Scripture with regard to the 5 books attributed to Moses and the millennium and things like that. So in any event, the church worked really well for us. Later in my life, when I was a junior, senior in high school, I think in an attempt to save me, one of my Mennonite aunts offered to send me to a Young Life youth camp, which is a Christian youth camp that's non-denominational Young Life. And so I went to this youth camp in Northern California, and I was probably the only member of the church there, and we sang more progressive Christian songs and clapped and did things like that. And it was a really great time, and there was a moment in that camp weekend where the pastor invited us to go out into the woods and contemplate God and Jesus and pray. And I went out and kneeled in the woods and had this very, very strong impression that I needed to serve a mission, that God was aware of me and that I needed to serve a mission. And that became a very important part of my journey and my story, that impression that I received that all these people around me, that God loved them, even though they believed differently, and that I needed to do something and impact the lives of others and go on a mission. So after I finished high school, my mother got remarried, and I decided to move to Utah, and ended up working at Solitude Ski Resort, and ended up doing the things that I need to do to be able to go on a mission. And so I ended up serving my mission in Barcelona, Spain, and it worked really, really well for me. I learned study habits that made me a better student, had all sorts of opportunities to serve. I served in one ward for about 13 months, and every couple months I'd get a new companion. And I developed reputation. I was so connected to that ward. By the time I left, they gave me a farewell. It was fantastic. So I came home from my mission. I ended up getting married while I was attending BYU. I ended up finishing my bachelor's at Utah State. And then we ended up going to grad school at University of Utah. And my wife and I were in Ron Rasband's ward. He was our bishop.
Oh, wow.
He was a great man. And Elder Ballard's son, Craig Ballard, was in that ward, and he became one of my closest friends during that period of time. So it was great. I got the opportunity to meet, some of the Huntsman family. I had opportunity to spend time in Elder Ballard's home and in his office and get to know what it was like for the son of an apostle and so forth. And all along this way, my father did what he needed to do to be able to be rebaptized. So when I came home from my mission, I was able to have the opportunity to rebaptize my father. And my bishop, and then subsequent, he was our stake president while I was on my mission, was F. Michael Watson, and he was the secretary to the first presidency.
Wow.
And so that was pretty cool because I got to learn more about the inner workings of the first presidency and the leadership of the church, and go to Michael Watson's office and go to the president of the church's office when he was out of town and be shown. That was pretty cool too.
Wow.
So I had all these really great opportunities. My testimony on my mission, one of my strongest spiritual experiences is toward the end of my mission, I had a fair amount of success, which wasn't very usual in Barcelona, Spain. But I was feeling, as a perfectionist, that was my tendency. I was feeling kind of guilty, and I was thinking I wanted to know whether my offering was acceptable to God. Could have I done better, or could God say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant"? And so there was a period of time, probably about 3 months before the end of my mission, that I was fasting and praying and asking Heavenly Father whether the offering of my mission was acceptable. And after a couple days of fasting and praying and so forth, I found myself on joint calls. We used to call them splits with the APs, and we went and visited this family that we had somewhat recently baptized a few months earlier, and then subsequently taught other families in this couple's home, and had really great success and great experiences. And we were meeting with this couple, and the sister, the wife, said, "Before you leave," it was getting late at night and we needed to leave, and she said, "Before you leave, there's something that I need to share with you." And so she went into her bedroom, and then she came back into the room where we were sitting, and she said, "This is my journal, and I want you to read the entry of the door for the day of my baptism." And so I read her journal, and I read her seeking to understand what the influence of the Spirit was, and that she knew that they needed to be baptized, and her experience that day in Sunday school and in sacrament meeting, and then her experience being baptized and how she felt coming out of the water. And she wrote about how she wished that when my hands were on her head, conferring her a member, that she hoped that I would never take my hands off of her head because of how she was feeling. And this was a tremendously spiritually impactful experience for me. I'm crying. I'm feeling a tremendous amount of spiritual connection. And in that moment, I felt like I received an answer from God that it wasn't really mine to judge whether or not my offering was worthy, that possibly my motive for asking that was more about me and maybe even prideful, but that I just needed to be grateful for the opportunity to participate in the lives of others, and that's what this was all about. And that was one of my most foundational spiritual experiences, is feeling like I had received that answer, that life is about having the opportunity to participate in the lives of others. And
Beautiful.
right.
Like that.
So in any event, not too long after finishing grad school, I finished my MBA. We moved to Billings, Montana, and I grew my financial planning practice here by buying the practices of retiring insurance agents and offering them financial planning. So now we service about between 3,000 and 4,000 households in
Wow, good for
Montana
you.
and northern Wyoming. Yeah, I have some great associates and great staff. And I had lots of opportunities to serve. I was gospel doctrine teacher. I had opportunity to serve on the high council, high priest group leader, ward mission leader, about 4 years as an ordinance worker. The temple is only a few minutes from our house. I could leave my house, drive to the temple, go in and change, and be in the prayer room within about 7 minutes is how our house is.
Wow.
Yeah. So the church worked really well for me. I had many, many foundational spiritual experiences. The construct that worked with me was that when I had the fruits of the Spirit, that meant that it was a divine witness that was reliable of truth, of the subject matter or the ritual or whatnot. And there were many times when I was teaching or leading that I felt prompted or inspired, like thoughts would come to my mind, or this is the topic that we need to focus on, or these are the needs of the people that we're serving. And that was a very, very significant part of my testimony. But all along during those years, I would encounter things that would cause some dissonance. And I think it's Richard Hotzoppel. He was a former BYU professor. One time he came and he gave kind of like a Education Week type. They used to call it Know Your Religion. It was kind of like Education Week. And he came and introduced to our stake the idea of the metaphorical shelf, putting things on a shelf in faith that you would find further light and knowledge someday. And over the years, as I would study things, I would encounter things that would cause dissonance because they wouldn't match the dominant narrative of the church, or I perceived that there was conflicts in scripture or other kinds of things that I would accumulate and I would put on my metaphorical shelf in faith that I'd receive further light and knowledge someday. And because I'm very analytical and because of how my memory works, over the years, I accumulated a lot of things on my shelf. And there were times that I was exposed to things that people today talk about being triggers for faith crisis, like Book of Abraham issues. I remember about 20 years ago, I home taught someone who was deep in faith crisis. I'd never seen it before. And it was about Book of Abraham issues. And he began to share with me what some of the problems were. And I'm like, I don't need to listen to any more of that and put it on a shelf, because I just wasn't in a point in my life where that was too threatening to my sense of identity. About 4.5 years ago, we ended up having 2 children total. And about 4.5 years ago, our then 22-year-old son came out to us as gay. And when he did, I couldn't shelf what that meant. Politically, I was leaned libertarian. I was very much a social libertarian. I didn't think if government could say, who could get married, then they could say what people hold as religious belief too, is how I view things. And as a social libertarian, I held beliefs that the church, would say that you need to live the law of chastity and so forth. But at the same time, I felt like government shouldn't say that my neighbor couldn't marry his boyfriend, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of where I was at. And our son, then 22 years old, came out to us as gay. And that evening, I went online to search for resources as to how an active believing member could support a gay child. And that evening, I stumbled across the Gospel Topics essays, and I didn't know that they existed. And
What year was this, roughly?
This
Ballpark?
was April 29th of 2016.
Okay, 2016.
Yeah, so 4.5 years ago. And when I stumbled across the Gospel Topics essays, and read the footnotes and then tried to understand, and I would go and read the cited sources that evening, I encountered information that I couldn't reconcile. And I perceived that some of the way the presentation was in the Gospel Topics essays, that they weren't entirely transparent or that they were misleading. And I don't want to get into the weeds of that, but just say that as I was studying the gospel topics essays, I came to a conclusion that for myself, that I had had many spiritual experiences about things that were partially or entirely inaccurate, including things that I had shelved over the years. And it was in particular the reading the race and the priesthood essay, I came to the conclusion that the brethren had spiritual experiences or witnesses with regard to the race span that were inaccurate. And when my construct for spiritual experiences, being reliable divine witnesses of truth, crumbled on me, that's what put me in faith crisis. That's what crashed all my shelves. And so I went to search for more resources to try to understand what these essays were. And that's when I stumbled across Mormon Think and Mormon Stories and the CES letter and Fair Mormon's debunking of it. So within a couple of weeks, I had Michael Ash's book, Shaken Faith Syndrome. I had Laura Hale's book wasn't out yet, but as soon as it came out, I bought it. I ended up getting the Givens books, Adam Miller's stuff. I never spent more time reading scriptures and praying than I did on my mission, other than that time that I was in deep faith crisis. What happened is when my construct for spiritual experiences crumbled on me, that they were real, but they had to be something different than I thought they were. At least that's what I was experiencing. I experienced a period of time of kind of the heavens closing, kind of a divine absence, because my brain only knew God through that thing. And then when that thing, the construct crumbled, my brain didn't experience that thing anymore, basically.
Yeah.
So in any event, I went and got blessings. I counseled with my leaders. I eventually, I was in that dark night of the soul period where I anxiously tried to reconstruct some sort of meaning, and I just couldn't find any answers. None of my local leaders had read the essays. They knew they existed. I kind of felt like I was going insane for a period of time. I ended up finding online support groups that were very, very helpful. I ended up going to Sunstone and going to all the sessions I could on faith crisis, and that was helpful. That fall, I ended up taking a trip to the church history department and spoke with Robin Jensen and other people in the history department to try to make sense of things. And after losing belief with regard to what the version of Mormonism that worked for me, I ended up deconstructing Christianity, because I thought, well, maybe I can hold a sense of Christianity and practice that in the Latter-day Saint Church, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I read Bart Ehrman, and I read Richard Friedman about who wrote the Bible, which is about how the Pentateuch came about. And I deconstructed New and Old Testament and realized that it was different than I thought it was. And in any event, I think what I would say is I have reconstructed meaning, but after about 20 months of my faith crisis, to set a boundary for myself, because I was experiencing so much dissonance, I ended up deciding to go ahead and resign my membership. In the meantime, I created a support group, Mormon Spectrum support group. I retained really close friendships with my bishop and my stake presidency. My stake president at the time actually was a business partner in a real estate development company. And I was able to do a good job retaining relationships while I was in that deep grief. Before we started recording, we talked about we referred to how people, a faith crisis is often an experience with grief, where you, and the stages of grief can include the stages of anger, depression, and so forth, and very, very difficult grief. And so I was able to find resources for that too.
So, and that was something that I wanted to kind of, just to interject here, to kind of summarize or look back over this with a couple thoughts or questions.
Sure.
So you kind of spent a good portion of your life building this belief structure or
Yes.
largely to some extent inheriting it, which I think is what a lot of people get.
Yeah.
And then as the shelf cracks, which is something that definitely can happen if too many things get put on the shelf, eventually shelves break.
Yeah.
And then you end up in sort of this deconstructionist mode where you're pulling everything apart
Yeah.
and it's all kind of collapsing, but as we're going through that, we're trying to make sense of it, but we're moving things around, and as we move them around, we end up finding that there's less there than we thought, and we end up actually deconstructing a lot. And like you said, you went into Christianity,
Yeah.
which I'm glad that you made that distinction, because for a lot of people, they don't understand, and I think it's very, very important to recognize that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Christianity are independent, like, claims in a way, in the sense that you could have it where Jesus Christ was who he claimed to be and all of that stuff, and he was the Redeemer of the world, but Joseph Smith was not one of his prophets, right? And I think for a lot of Latter-day Saints, that's just like, it's all just like wrapped together in like the same package that cannot be separated. I was fortunate enough to grow up. I actually went to Baptist schools, and I just went to public schools, was homeschooled, and then went to Catholic schools. So I was exposed to Christianity outside of the church and had a very good familiarity with it. I actually was a youth counselor on a Catholic religious retreat at my Catholic high school.
Yeah.
Actually, was student body president of a Catholic high school. So,
Right.
I love Catholicism in so many ways, and I have great respect for much of Christianity. But I do think that it's interesting that I'm happy to hear that you separated the two. I'm obviously a little bummed that you weren't able to retain that structure. But
Right.
I think it's important that anyone who's dealing with these issues, that they have at least that proper framing to separate the two. But as it all deconstructs, and people begin to go through, like you're saying, the grief process, which includes anger and resentment.
Yeah.
You are someone who I've interacted with a lot of different people who have been through, a faith crisis and all this kind of deconstruction and end up very resentful. I've not seen that with you. I've seen that you have maintained a level of civility and engagement. And while you disagree, and you and I will disagree on a lot of things, there's a level of relationship there that you have been able to maintain in civility. And my question is, what was it that helped you to not become someone who, or I guess kind of avoid the trap of being stuck in a resentful state like some people get to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to build up some context to that and then answer that.
Yeah.
So if I go back to the beginning, as human beings, we have this propensity to enmesh our sense of identity, our moral identity, our belonging, and so forth, with our belief systems, with our tribe, with our community, with our work. Eckhart Tolle would say with our forms. And so also for me, as I expressed, a significant part of my identity was the way that I interpreted my spiritual experiences as an identity or a relationship with God, with divinity, and what those things meant. So when I went through a faith crisis and I experienced a crumbling of the beliefs that I held, I also experienced a crumbling of identity, of personal identity. Like, who was I? What were these spiritual experiences? What did I base my life on? All of that, like a major reset. Mm-hmm. And what was helpful were quite a few things. One is how many of the closest people to me interacted with me. So for my bishop, like, he gave me blessings. He's like, I just don't, have answers for you. And my stake presidency, they spent time with me too. They trusted that I was honest in my journey. They certainly wanted me to develop faithful reconciliations, but they would say something like, my bishop said, if you experience dissonance and pain coming to church, then I don't want you to come to church. I'm going to support you in what feeds you. And that's the kind of pastoral care that I received. And there was a period of time that I used significantly much more emotionally charged language. That was probably in later 2016 when I was still in the grief process.
I could probably learn some good lessons from you about not using such emotionally charged language.
Oh, I use very, very emotionally charged language because I would like go to a Daniel Peterson page, or I would try to engage with more of the traditional Fair Mormon type apologists. And typically it would be hard to not speak with emotionally charged language because I was in deep grief. But most of the time I was met with what I perceived to be gaslighting. Like, how could you not know this? You must have been a lazy member of the church. You
Mm-hmm.
never really believed anyway. Those kinds of things
Yeah,
which were not helpful at all.
definitely.
But there were some people who I ended up developing relationships with who validated my experience, even though we had very disparate beliefs. So there's someone who participates pretty regularly in these kinds of circles by the name of Ken Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And we developed a friendship, and we emailed each other. He's actually from northern Wyoming, not too far from me.
And is Ken is a believing Latter-day Saint?
Very much so. Like,
Okay.
he just wrote a book about Mormon belief and how it relates to the Apocrypha. And I think he probably contributes to Fair Mormon. Tarek LaCour and I ended up becoming friends. We ended up messaging each other. Jackson Washburn ended up becoming a friend with me. He was less progressive then than he is now. But still, we ended up with this friendship. Andrew Sargent participates in Thoughtful Saints. Like, he and I had some pretty polemic interactions at different periods of time, but over time we ended up becoming friends. And so I think the main thing is that I ended up with these relationships with people who validated my experience, would answer questions in a less defensive way.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And just on
and
that,
with kindness.
I feel like that's a recurring theme that I feel like there is a need for empathy and validation from those who are going through faith crisis, from those whose shelves have broke. It's like they can't relate to someone who is like, whose shelf is, hasn't been deconstructed in any way and won't engage on the things that maybe have broken your shelf. Or if they do it in a very defensive and, I think that when we want to influence people, I think the great lesson of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is not to actually go to them with sort of the answers and throw it in their face. And that's why I'm terrible at actually convincing people, because that's what I like to do. But
you're reading the book.
I know I'm reading the book. So just so everyone knows, Anthony suggests
kill the messenger.
Exactly. So Anthony, just so everybody knows, recommended that I read a great book, which I'm really enjoying, which is How to Have Impossible Conversations. I highly recommend it for everyone. With that said, I don't see myself as a good person to engage with someone in a faith crisis in the way that I do online. In fact, I don't. I find that the best way to help someone in faith crisis, just from my own kind of personal perspective, is not to ignore those issues, but a lot of times more in face-to-face interactions. I think online just is it's hard to have some of those trickier conversations in online conversations. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not the best forum for it. And so, but I do think, and largely because there is this need for empathy. There is this need for someone to actually connect with you on a different level, so that you feel like they aren't just some defensive person that doesn't care about what you think, but they're actually taking into account both your frustrations and your considerations and all the things that you're going through. And I see that over and over. And so, would you say that has been something that's been very, very helpful in making it so that you don't build up a resentment? Is that kind of one of the big factors of that, or are there other things that helped?
So, as I alluded earlier, so faith crisis work is grief work. And so this, in a similar way that you would sit with and support someone who's grieving the loss of a loved one or a marriage or a business or someone that just made some really stupid mistakes, um, the kind of support you provide to someone when they're processing grief, that's generally the most helpful kind of support to provide someone when they're processing a faith crisis, because it is grief work.
Is there a point at which, and again, I don't know, and maybe we don't have the answer to this, but is there a point at which grief work, or at which it is time to begin to try and reconcile their beliefs? Because my immediate thing, and I think a lot of us, is, well, let me fix what's broken. Let me help you to see that this issue within the church isn't really that big of an issue, or whatever. Or here's how to explain the multiple accounts of the first vision, or whatever else, right? Kind of get into that apologetic mode. Is there a place for that? Like, is there a point at which we should have those kind of conversations?
Yeah, so a few observations. The first is, if you're talking with someone who's going through a faith crisis like me, like I already read multiple times, all that stuff, like Neil Johnson. Anyway, he's in one of our groups too. He has The Church is True website. He has apologetic reconciliations. So I tried to read all of those things to make sense, and so that wouldn't have been helpful for me, because I probably would have studied them just as much as the most people. So there are people that haven't, and so I would say the best approach is to say, you know what, when I've decided to engage with these topics like the first vision, I found that some of the best arguments were in the Laura Hale's book, A Reason for Faith. Michael Ash has some stuff. If you go and you listen to some of the things that Richard Bushman has put forth, like maybe he has some things that might be helpful. But I want you to know that, this is what I would be role playing. I would say, I want you to know that I'm going to love and support you regardless of how you reconcile these things. Like, I'm going to support you. I know that you're sincere, you're seeking for truth. And sometimes there are going to be times that you're going to want to unpack stuff that maybe there's a knowledge gap because I don't know. I haven't read what you've read or whatnot. And maybe what I'm going to do is try to suggest that there are resources that you could go to. And if you go to those and you want to talk about them afterwards, I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about it. But in the end, when people are grieving, like if a kid lost his older brother to death by suicide, they don't need to be fixed or told that it's okay. They just need someone to sit with them.
They need to heal first. They need to heal the emotional wounds before you can begin to deal with anything else. And I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I would say that, and I think there's a point at which, and maybe this is the way I could frame it, when the shelf breaks, you're in grief mode, right? It's fully like broken and everything's falling apart.
When it fully is nuked, then you're definitely in grief mode. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
On the other side of the equation, I think that people do eventually get to a point to where maybe they've gone through the grief process and they're far enough along in it that they may be open to things. But again, I would say my kind of take on this is that a person who reaches that point is someone who they need to ask for it. Or you need to ask them if they want the information. I found that there's great wisdom in asking someone the simple question like, hey, would you be interested in a recent book that I read on this subject that I think is really insightful? Because then it's not like you're throwing it down their throat. You're offering something, and people I've found that when you do that are much better. And these are just kind of tactical things maybe, but I think more fundamentally, and this is kind of where I wanted to go in this conversation, and we'll go a little past the time that we'd originally talked about because I think we can. There's some good stuff that we'll get into. I want to go into this whole idea of deconstruction and then reconstruction. Okay. In my kind of take on things, everyone has to have an ultimate why, right? Let's get past all the church stuff, all of it, and let's just go back to we are human beings, and we have to make choices every day about what we do. And I'm a big believer, Jordan Peterson talks about this, and I think it's a brilliant point. He says, your religion is ultimately determined by what you do. Your behavior will demonstrate what your beliefs actually are. I can say all day, I don't believe in X, Y, and Z, but my behavior will betray it when I act out the behavior of someone who somewhere deep down inside us actually believes that. You know what I mean? Like, I may say, yeah, I don't believe there's any such thing as morality. And then you go and someone wrongs you and you begin to behave as though there is some sort of actual morality that other people are entitled to, or that they are obligated to follow, right? And so so for me, as I look at just the question of belief generally, everyone has to believe in something. They have to, and what I mean by that is that they have to, if they want to be consistent and avoid cognitive dissonance, they need to have some sort of a philosophical substructure that acts as the basis for their life, for their behavior and their actions. I believe in love, or I believe in being good to people, or I believe in, maybe you're kind of an old school Viking type who's like, I believe in power and winning, and that's the greatest value. You have some ultimate kind of set of values that grounds the reason that you choose A over B. And within the church, there's an entire, or I would even say beyond the church, within Christianity or other religious faiths, there's an enormous structure of philosophy, belief, I would even say legend and myth, culture that kind of forms this worldview that a person has. And I guess what I'm most interested in is sort of this idea of I have to pick a worldview if I want to live in the world. I have to have a worldview. I have to have these implicit axioms that ground rationally my behavior so that I'm not just acting on instinct and whim at any given moment as a rational being. And there's only so it's sort of like I'm in the market, the worldview market, right? I'm trying to find the worldview that I think best encapsulates reality in all of its dimensions. And one of the reasons that there's the old scripture, and this comes up. It's sort of, Peter and them, a shelf breaks when Jesus is like, hey, y'all got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they're all like, that's weird. and then, a lot of people leave, and Jesus looks at Peter and the disciples and says, well, you guys leave as well. And they said, well, where will we go? And I think for me, I often find myself in that boat where I say, where will I go? And so what I like to spend a lot of my time doing, rather than deconstructing all the things that I don't know within my own faith or the doubts that I have, which I do have, everyone has a shelf and you have some things on it and you have some things that don't quite make sense. And I do my best to get things off the shelf because I don't like to leave them on the shelf for too long because I know that eventually my shelf can break. And sometimes I'm able to get things off easier than others. However, I know that ultimately I have to choose a grounding for my belief. Now, I could jump into I just don't know and be an agnostic. The problem I have with agnosticism is that you could be agnostic about, like, here's an analogy. And this is my view of faith generally. Sorry if I'm kind of going on this, but I wanted to kind of give you my view on this.
That's fine.
The way I see faith is the worldview that you place your chips on. You have to place your chips somewhere. You're going to live your life. I'll use this as an example. I don't know if my wife is faithful to me. Okay? Now, I'm 99.999% sure that she's faithful to me, but I can't know it. I don't, quote unquote, know it, right? But I'm 99% sure that she is, or more. And so therefore, my behavior reflects that faith, that belief that she is. At some point, I may have doubts. Maybe something happens where I'm kind of like, that was kind of weird. Is she cheating on me? Let's say now I'm 70% sure. Now I say it's 50% sure because something else weird happens. Well, what is the point at which I change my behavior related to her? I divorce her. I say, okay, I'm done. I think you've cheated on me, or, and people maybe if your wife is just a jerk and you already have a crappy marriage anyway, and you don't really like being around her, I might jump ship at 80%. I'm like, yeah, she's probably cheating on me anyway, right? But if I have the greatest marriage in the world and 8 kids and it's just like everything in my life is perfect, I'm going to have a pretty higher threshold before I go and throw that out the window. And I use that analogy with the church. The church in my life, from the perspective of has it been good, is very high. I have a good marriage with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think that it works very functionally in people's lives. And there's a lot, I think, we debate about if it works for everyone, yada, yada. But for me, that's the way it's been. And so my threshold for the amount of doubt I'm willing to sustain is higher, because at the end of the day, if my wife was cheating on me, everything's going to change. And I have to go find something new, a new spouse, someone new to marry, a new worldview. And the thing is one thing with the church, and I think that this is maybe where the analogy on marriage breaks down, is that you should never be fully married to the church. You should always be dating. You should always be open to other ideas. And what I like to do, and one of the things that I do, is I really do truly spend a great deal of my time trying to understand the different worldviews of others. That's why I read Sam Harris. That's why I read Noah Harari's, Sapiens book. You get the secular view and the humanistic view of the world and the other religious views of the world. Because at the end of the day, I have to pick some kind of a camp, some sort of a worldview to base my behavior on, right? I'm going to end up with some, quote unquote woman. And the question is just who. And so I guess the only thing I would kind of ask on that is that a good way to frame the situation of trying to find a meaning and purpose for your own behavior in your life? Or is there another way that you would look at it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so those are very reasonable questions, and would be similar to the things that I was asking when I was in the deconstruction phase. I go back to this idea that as human beings, we tend to enmesh these beliefs and our roles and so forth into our own sense of personal identity. And so it's not only threatening of losing a belief system, but losing of a sense of identity, of moral identity and belonging of who I am. And so it's very, very threatening. And so when people are going through a deconstructive phase, they are negotiating all these kinds of things that you're giving analogies for. So if this isn't true, then, but it worked, some of it worked for me, like, what am I supposed to do with that? So one analogy that my stake president and very close friend gave me when I was in the beginning, he says, I want you to imagine that you have this beautiful 1,000-piece puzzle on your table that was prescribed to you, and it gave you meaning and purpose in your life, and how you perceived things and your paradigms and everything. And that's what the church gave to you. And then through no fault of your own, your puzzle has been shoved onto the floor, and there's nothing left on the table, and there it is in 1,000 pieces on the floor. He said, what you're going to do now is you're going to lean down and you're going to pick up one piece at a time, and you're going to sit with it, and you're going to look at it, and you're going to decide whether you're going to put it back on the table.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you want more content, including the podcast, go to thoughtful-faith.com. Thanks for watching.